My voice sounds kind of extra cool today.
I agree.
Do you agree?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't hear the extra coolness.
Oh.
Yeah, your voice doesn't.
Yeah, Molly, we should probably tell everyone why your voice doesn't sound as good today.
Yeah.
So you guys,
You want me to say it?
yeah, Molly, you want to say why your voice sounds bad today?
Well, there's this little thing called COVID-19. I don't have it, Lord willing, but I've been exposed, so I'm at home in quarantine.
Oh, we miss you.
For
Boo-hoo.
so long. For so many days.
Oh, let me tell you, we're on day 13, and I've got 7 more. So
No bueno.
we're even.
It's really rough because of how attached to you I've become. I was telling Garrett when you had to go into quarantine, it affects my professional life and my personal life to have Molly in quarantine because she embodies both.
For everyone listening and watching this online, like we locked down our staff team really hard so that we could all work in person together with no masks on.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the only people we see, and half of the staff went away, and we all feel it
Yeah.
Right now.
deeply.
But I don't know about you guys. I don't think it's been that difficult without Molly. I'm doing fine.
This is Josh's bit about Molly lately.
Not
Wait,
much.
I'm sorry, Josh. You're saying
Not
you
much
don't
has
miss
changed.
me, or what?
Well, Garrett said we miss you, and I think he used the term "we" a little loosely there.
Josh is just getting tired of being the one that's always roasted.
I know.
trying to
He's
find
really-
out.
I got to get my shots in while I can.
He's been
They're gonna
turning
be
it
coming my
around.
way.
I'm here for it. That was great.
He's been trying to turn it around while you're gone. He's made a few digs, Malls.
I
Just
will not
kidding.
stand
Miss
for
you.
So today I have a question for you all that I think is really going to help me get to know you.
Okay.
Okay, here's what I'd like to know. What Josh is
I'm waiting in
bracing himself.
anticipation.
What is something that if you didn't do it by the time you died, you would be really sad?
man.
Like a major
Wow.
bucket list item, like something that you're like, I must experience this or do this
Oh, jeez.
before I die.
I have 2.
Okay,
Oh, you knew that quickly.
I do.
Quick.
It came off the top. It came off the top of the dome.
perfect. Love that.
So 1, I want to be bilingual.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I really, really do. I want to know what that experience is like.
What
so
language are you?
I think it would be Spanish, most likely. I think Filipinos, of which I'm half, if you didn't know, share a lot of cultural traits with Spanish-speaking cultures because Spain conquered the Philippines initially.
Yeah.
So, like, I've always felt an affinity to Latino culture, and so because of that, so I wanted to learn Spanish. Like, one of the things that I've often told Aubrey, I'm like, Aubrey, at some point, like maybe during our like sabbatical or at some point in the future after the kids are gone, I want to move to Guatemala and go to a language school. And
Dude.
like I don't know why
Yes.
Guatemala.
That'd be
But,
awesome.
like I went to Guatemala
Why not?
on a mission trip a while back ago, and they had language schools there, and I was like, oh man, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna stick with that. I'm just gonna go with 1.
Just that
land,
one.
Yeah, I'll just land with the 1.
I mean, that would be difficult. Like
Yes.
that would take a lot of commitment. So
Yes.
if that's your thing.
Yeah, that's it.
Nice. Is Aubrey open to moving to Guatemala someday when the kids are gone?
Yeah, but I kind of want to do it with the kids. Like I want to do
Whoa.
all of these things with the kids.
Oh.
Yeah, because it's
I
like
love
cool
that.
stories.
Wow.
I
But
know.
it sounds so hard.
There are 4 of them. They're kind of like an
I'm
army.
in
If we
for
made,
that.
but here's the thing: if we had one more, we could start our own basketball team. So that's been.
Yeah.
What would you call yourselves?
I don't know. It's not like
Be the Shellstas.
Shooter.
it's not like I'm good at basketball nor any of
I
my
know.
line.
That does seem like a random. Well, definitely a random reason to have another
Well,
child.
I just don't know of like any other sports that require only 5 people. So that's
Yeah.
it.
I think the first thing that pops in my head is I want to play an instrument well.
Oh, okay.
So
Is that real? Like that's actually a goal
Yeah,
that you
uh-huh.
have?
Yes, like I want to do that definitely before I die. I'd be upset with myself if I didn't actually like the whole time I had to live play music. I think it'd be fun. So
I had no idea that you
I have like
wanted to do that.
I can play guitar very minorly, meaning like 4 songs and a few chords.
Nice.
And
Well,
I
that means
wanna
you
be-
could probably play every worship song.
yeah, exactly. But I just want to, for example, Kua, who's our worship director at Ecclesia, every time he plays guitar, I'm just like envious of him being able to do that.
Yeah, he is. But
So-
he's also uniquely very good.
Oh, he's so
Yeah.
gifted.
Yeah.
But just be able to like pick up any instrument and feel like I know how to do this without having to like think through it so much and just naturally kind of do it. I want to be able to get to that point in some sort of instrument.
Nice.
That, and then travel to at least like 4 or 5 countries
Would you say Italy, where you have
where I have dual citizenship. Yes, I think it'd be nice to go back to the place where I'm a citizen of.
That's another podcast throwback for y'all that have been listening for a while.
Yep. I'd say
that one
too.
I did know. The travel thing about you, I
Yeah.
did know. That does seem to be like real for you.
I do. I really want to travel.
That's
I
like
love
you're
that.
just Enneagram 7-ness right there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
embodied.
this question is a little existential feeling for me because I have like 50 things that I think that'd be laying on my deathbed and be like, I didn't go to Niagara Falls.
And eat a Snickers bar.
Yeah.
I did it with a Hershey's, just like not a Snickers.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Sorry to put you in that position today.
That's okay. I had to choose. So my
Those
practice
are
was
really
just
good
choosing.
ones. Yeah. What about you, Malls?
Okay, the only thing that's ever been on my bucket list is to run a marathon.
Dude.
But I just did that.
Come on.
Now I don't have anything on my bucket list. So I
Man.
really need to think about it.
What a place to be.
The other thing that is like, feels like the wrong answer, but like, I think having kids, like I really want to have kids, but a lot of that maybe isn't in my control necessarily. So, yeah.
No, I think that's a great answer. To be honest, that's one of the first things that came to mind for me too. I was like, there's not a lot that on my deathbed I'd be sad to not experience, except for
Right.
motherhood.
I
Is a
think
big
so,
one.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. My other thing though, I would really like to write a book. I'd really
Yeah.
like to publish a book.
That was my other one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the only things that I've always wanted to do. And even when I've like ebbed and flowed in what I want to do as a career, that hasn't changed that. I've been like, but I do want to write a book.
I just gave you your book idea like a second ago.
Yeah. What was it again?
It really stuck.
Changing your language around.
Oh,
yes.
yes.
Changing your language to reflect what you mean. I think you could
Dude.
do a whole thing about that.
I am big on that.
Yeah.
Buy that.
Yeah. Like
And it's called What Do You Mean?
What do you
What
mean?
do you mean? Josh also could write a book as well. I think that Josh's would be on the spiritual development of Justin Bieber.
Oh, 100%.
I would buy that
What?
from Josh.
Dude.
Do you think about that a lot?
Oh, I don't think about a lot, but I've been there every step of the way for that guy's
You've
development
been
in the
there.
Lord. He is, and I'm proud of him. He's like following Jesus for real right now.
But
So-
who in this room has met him?
Okay,
Only
you're so
me.
cool.
Oh, I did not know this.
We'll use met is also a loose term.
No, I met him.
Okay, does he know your name?
No. But it was like a face-to-face as close
Did
to
you see him?
No, I met him.
And what'd
I
you
said,
say?
"Are you Justin Bieber?" And he said, "Yes."
That's all.
And then I said, "Can I take a picture with you?" And he said, "No, I'm trying not to be seen," because we were in Bellevue.
Mm.
It's
cool.
real.
Whatever. 1 degree
I
away.
believe you.
Thank
I believe you.
I have a video of it actually. I'll show you all after this.
Oh, I'm excited about that.
People would buy that book.
Yeah, I agree.
Wait, for
Yeah.
real?
What?
Yeah, totally.
Oh,
Josh doesn't-
Justin.
I'll send it to you. After
Molly
this.
doesn't think that anyone would buy that book. For
Yeah, I
real,
know.
people would buy that. She's just trying. She's trying to get you back for
True.
earlier.
Yeah, I get it.
My goal for that question was achieved. I wanted to learn something about you all, and I think that I did.
Yeah.
I did, except I did know about you, Malls, but classic.
I'll try to come up with a secret to tell you later.
Okay, great. Also, though, I'm probably kind of stalling because what we're getting into today is big.
It's
spicy.
It's a big, spicy, restless topic. We are going to be talking about Christian nationalism.
Whoa.
Yeah. And mostly what we want to do is to submit some questions and some ways of thinking about this topic. Yes. I think it's important to say that we are not experts on the topic. Maybe with the exception of Garrett, whose hobby it is to think about this.
It is a particular hobby of
this
mine.
Could be your book idea.
This is your book idea.
No, there's way better. I wouldn't have anything to say in addition to the probably 18 books I've read on
You
it.
could compile many quotes.
That's true. That's fair.
Yeah, but with the exception of Garrett, who loves to think about this, mostly we are kind of just processing it ourselves and feel like it's just a really valuable conversation to have, especially right now, kind of in this cultural moment.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to be doing today, is just talking about this topic, this concept from different facets and kind of proposing some questions and things like that.
Love it. Let's talk.
Sweet.
So I'm hyping myself up.
Yes, I believe in you.
I'm excited.
Yeah. Lead us through it.
Well, let's start the conversation actually by talking about what happened at the Capitol recently. And more talking about how it made you feel and kind of how you processed it. Like we as a group kind of jumped on a call that day, right when we heard about it, and processed it a little bit together. But let's just revisit that and talk about like what was going through our head as we were watching that attack and the aftermath of that and everything.
I can start. I was just where I was. I feel like this will be one of those, where were you when this thing happened? Like in my life.
Yeah.
My dad always, like, he talked about it in terms of JFK because that was his first major one, like where he remembers where he was when JFK was assassinated. And for me, my first one of that was 9/11. And then there'll probably be there's probably this one too. And so I was in my office. We had to put on a church service that night, and I was in the process of writing my message. And Josh actually wrote me a message about something, just like essentially double checking a post that he was about to post, just about what was happening in the Capitol. And I didn't really quite understand. I knew that there was a protest and that they were certifying the election. And I was like, oh yeah, I read it, and I was like, oh, okay, like I should probably look into this. And then I finished reading it, and I'm like, yeah, that sounds fine to me, Josh. Obviously. Before I really understood it. And then I opened up Twitter, and then I opened up the news, and I'm like, whoa, like they are storming the Capitol. And I was like, I think the images really shocked me.
Yeah.
Really, really shocked me. Because they were setting up for the inauguration of Joe Biden. So there was all the scaffolding, there was people, there were so many flags. And then the other thing that was really startling to me was the amount of Christian and religious symbols that was in it. Yeah. It was a huge deal. So, that would be what I'd say.
Yeah.
And it was, I would say that it was just startling. Like I think the first thing I would say is, out of the reaction would be, like, as you'll hear, I have, through probably the most of this conversation, I have massive critiques of representative democracy, the totalization that American identity can take, particularly in the Christian life. And I am highly critical of American identity and the intersection of the Christian faith. But all that to say is, I still looked at it and I was like, whoa, is democracy going to be there tomorrow? And I was honestly fearful and scared. which was I did not expect. That I would say that's still an emotion that I'm presently processing. Like, well, for the amount of critiques that I spent probably the last honestly 2 decades of my life cultivating, it was really revealing to me how important I think democracy is, I just I don't know of a better, like, it's the best thing that we got going right now. And maybe that means my lack of imagination or my own cultural context or whatever, but I really still think democracy is a good idea. And that was really kind of interesting to me to process.
Yeah, that is interesting. I think a lot of my emotions from what was happening came not from seeing it initially, because I actually watched it from the very beginning. Because I was watching the news from early that morning, just had it on in the background of working. So I watched it develop. So it wasn't that like coming on and seeing those very like, I don't know, bold images right away. Yeah. I like watched it develop, but I think what felt very jarring right away then was getting on and seeing so many people's interpretations of what was happening.
Oh, interesting.
Like opened something up in me. And I mean, on a phone call with you guys, I was pretty tearful because I think there was just, it illuminated so much.
Right.
And I've heard a lot of people say since that I would say domestic terrorism, that they weren't surprised and that they're surprised that anyone was surprised. Yeah. And I get that. But what I was surprised by is the depth of what it illuminated for me about what's going on in America. And I think surprised by certain people's interpretations that I wouldn't have expected, and it just was like
people
seeing it, I guess, through everyone else's eyes, and for there to be so many eyes that that were sharing their perspective on it was really a lot to take in, and still is.
Yeah,
that's good, Kenna. I feel like I would say my initial response actually was kind of what you were just saying. Like, I wasn't surprised, because it felt like this was like kind of egged on and embedded for weeks.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't shocking to me that that group of people did what they did, but it was shocking that it could just happen. Like, it was shocking to me that they succeed in large part in like getting in the Capitol. And that just felt like an idea in my head that felt impossible. Like that felt like a movie happening in front of your eyes where like,
it did.
We've seen movies all the time where like the White House is being locked down and stormed and the Capitol is being attacked and all this different stuff. But it was just weird watching it like in real time, not from like an outside enemy, from like other Americans, like attacking what they felt was wrong. And that was just startling to me that there was that. I mean, it was startling to me that we got to a point where so many people were convinced of a certain idea of what they were fighting for democracy, and at the same time they were attacking democracy. Right. And that was just disturbing to me. But I agree with you, G. I also think I was disturbed by the amount of Christians that defended it, the amount of Christians that made excuses and buts kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a good idea, but and I think I was shocked by like the large symbolism that was there that tied the cross and fighting for America, and people's statements that were there that were like, we're doing this for God. And there was a video that came out about people praying in the Senate, like as they were ransacking the building, they were thanking God for the opportunity to be there. And it sickened to me. Like watching that was like legitimately sickening to my spirit. So my first reaction was anger, sadness, not surprised, but also a little bit of like, man, this is where we are. And it wasn't surprising, but it did feel a little defeating. And so I think that, and the other things that stuck out to me very, very quickly was how, I mean, this has been gone over time and time again at this point. Cause I know we're almost a month after recording this, almost a month after it happened, but, that how long it took for people to come and defend the Capitol, how long it
Right.
took for the guard to be there, how long it took. Like, I personally was startled at the comparison of that to what happened during the whole Black Lives Matter movement.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that stuck out to me like a sore thumb very, like, immediately. That was an immediate reaction I had. That wasn't something I saw someone else say. That was like, why is that happening when I saw so many images of it being so quick to use force in different circumstances? And it felt like if there was ever a reason to use force to protect the Capitol, like, I would never want advocation of force, but it just felt like, what are we doing? And I was just confused by all of it. So all those different thoughts were happening at once, and it was confusing. It was discouraging. It was illuminating, like you said, Kenna. But it was all of it happening together.
Yeah, I would say a similar, kind of combination of a lot of what you all are sharing. I also was, I didn't have my phone with me. I was like working, so I had no idea what was going on. And I get a text from one of you. It was like, "Are you watching the news? Like, what? Are you seeing this?" And so I jumped on and started looking and seeing what was going on. And I think in addition to what a lot of you are sharing about with just like feeling saddened and feeling like you said sickened, Josh, I think is a pretty accurate word to describe some of the emotions that I was experiencing. But also I think I felt like the need to sort of defend my understanding of who God is. Yeah. And almost like proved to people, like as more people were posting on social media and more of like people in my sphere were reacting and responding to what was happening, I think I felt like I wanted to make sure people knew that like, no, this is not a representation of God's kingdom, and this is not a representation of who I understand Jesus to be. And so I felt like that tension myself of just wanting to make sure people understood that. And really, I can maybe post on social media, I can maybe talk to people about it, but there's no way I can fully communicate that or try to convince people of that. And then in addition to that, I think another prominent experience I had, maybe not that day, like, I mean, really not just that day, like continually, is like judgment in my heart and a lot of bitterness, specifically towards other Christians who I felt like were blaspheming the name of the Lord and like who were, just really misunderstanding what it means to live like Christ in this world. And that's a lot of like work that I got to kind of work through in my own heart, and we got to do some cool stuff with that at our service that night, and just to like invite the Lord into that and repent of my own judgment and the own ways that I have kind of perpetrated systems that are broken in this world as well. And so that was really powerful. But yeah, I would say defense and judgment were some things that I experienced, kind of in addition to like what all of you are sharing as well, for sure.
Yeah, and I think we probably all experienced that too.
Oh, 100%.
I know that's one of the things that we shared a lot right as it was unfolding, and we were kind of together, and I imagine that's a lot of the people in our community were experiencing that too. Yeah. And out of anything else to
I
add,
think
Molly?
I was just gonna say, I think one thing I've been thinking about a lot since that, and I mean really what we're all talking about is like, what is that tension? Like when I feel the tension to defend like my understanding of who God is, I'm asking like, why are people who are claiming to be Christians like doing this in the name of God? Like where does that come from? Where does that misunderstanding and misinterpretation of what I believe the Bible says and who I believe Jesus to be, like where is that rooted in? And I think that's what we're trying to talk about, and where that term nationalism comes from. And I've been struggling like to really define it and to really know how to understand the misinterpreting or like where those ideologies are rooted in. And so I think it would be helpful to just sort of talk about like really explicitly what we mean when we say Christian nationalism.
I think that's good.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I think that it brings to mind a lot of like images and stereotypes,
Sure.
but it is really hard to define. Like, we've tried to define it amongst ourselves, and so we'll just talk a little bit about some of what that could mean. But
right, and we know for a fact that people are trying to figure that out. I think Josh did some research on it, and like the term Christian nationalism has up like 7,000% in searches, like over like from this time last month. You know, so it's a hard concept to get your brain around for a bunch of reasons that I think we'll probably explore a little bit more as we talk. But Malta, were you able to find a good definition of it for us?
Yeah, I read like 3 or 4 articles and nobody defined it, which I was like, this is not helpful. You know, I was like, they would describe like, and that is where we see Christian nationalism. I'm like, well, what is it?
Yeah.
But I did stumble upon a couple of different places that felt pretty helpful. And the first one was in an article called The Dangerous Heresy of Christian Nationalism. And I think that was a guy named Brian Zahnd.
Brian Zahnd, yeah.
Brian Zahnd. And he basically, like, this was a really basic definition, but it was really helpful for me to put some language around it. He basically said it's like the idolatrous combination of the Christian faith to American patriotism and essentially confusing America for the kingdom of God. So it's this element of like aligning specifically American values and American patriotism with our Christian faith. That there's like a link between the two that's inherent in how we live out our faith and how we live out our identity as Christians that is like has some sort of connection. And then so that was like a really good basic foundation definition for me. And then there was another place that I found it in an article from Christianity Today where they defined it as it's a set of policy prescriptions for what the nationalist the American government should do. Yeah. And so it's this political ideology actually like about American identity. Yeah. And so those were some of the definitions that I felt like gave some like flesh onto actually conceptualizing what that was. It's still, honestly, I'm still kind of working out like so what is it? Like, right. But I think that's a helpful place for me to start and understanding, there's a common American politics and Christian identity that are linked when we're talking about this pursuit of Christian nationalism.
Right.
Yeah. Along those same lines of those kind of definitions you gave, I was just listening to a podcast the other day where the guy was saying that a way that he thinks about Christian nationalism is it's the prioritization of Christian values in American policy.
Policy, yeah, that's good.
Which is a helpful definition, but illuminates a lot of problems because what are Christian values? It's like a big question that follows that for me. And it's like, even in defining Christian nationalism, there's a lot of problematic things that come up.
Right.
Wicca wicca. We lost Molly.
We did, y'all.
The internet
and like the whole city's out.
Yeah, so our city, I guess there was a cable cut down like south of us.
Oh, yeah. You know the reason why all this is happening?
Yeah, our tech guy at the church like sent a message out. Yeah. Anyway, so I guess it must be affecting Molly's Wi-Fi now.
Gotcha. Darn, we lost our best soldier.
Onward, Christian shoulders.
Well, we can use the term best loosely here, I think.
He only feels comfortable doing this when Molly's not around.
Oh, man.
I feel like earlier was like your first foray into making
I hope
fun of
she
her.
listens, Molly, if you're listening. Hi.
Anyway, okay, back to it because this is such a good and important topic. And Josh, you asked a really good question.
Yeah, you were talking about how with Christian nationalism, that part of the definition is advocating for Christian values in public policy. And the question is that even wrong? Like advocating for Christian values in public policy? And then Yeah.
Then Molly left. Yeah,
Molly left.
I think the thing that I was about to respond with was just that is part of the difficulty of figuring this out is there a way to advocate for the Christian vision of the good in the public square that doesn't inherently define it as Christian nationalism? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's and people, I think that is a really important question for people to wrestle with. For yourself, you need. I think that's what the thing that as I'm processing and thinking through like how this podcast and this video can be helpful is, it's going to raise questions about a bunch of things that Christians haven't thought about robustly. In common places like localized churches. Like these conversations have happened in academia for a while, but these like now it's like on the ground in the grassroots. And so my one way that I would try to, like, at least as I've thought about it, to help submit and contribute to some of these discussions is that it's not just about policy. Christian nationalism, in the way that we're thinking about it, has something to do with the identity of America.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just you're advocating for the Christian vision of justice, but you're looking for the enthronement of the Christian vision of justice, or at least a very particular perspective on it, to be given access to all of the power of the American government and then made to be one of the centralizing pieces of American identity. So there is something different about Christian nationalism making a claim on American identity and enforcing that Christian identity or Christian visions of the justice or the good or the particular policies on everyone else, which I think is problematic for a voluntary religion.
Right.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Right. That's what's complicated about that question that you asked, Josh, is like, it really just brings up a lot more questions for me.
Yeah.
Kind of going back to how we prefaced this whole conversation in the beginning it's really just a bunch of questions for listeners to think through for themselves, because when you ask say your question again?
Like, is it even wrong to advocate for Christian values within public policy?
Right. As a Christian, you're like, well, like, what if the answer is yes, it's wrong? There's like an element to which that makes sense, because not everyone in our nation is a Christian. And so to impose a Christian, quote unquote, Christian value, which would have to be defined in and of itself, because that gets really, really muddy really quickly. But to impose a Christian value on someone who is not a Christian, there's like some ethical dilemma there for me. But also as a Christian, there's an ethical dilemma in not advocating for the way that you see the world flourishing the best, because that's how God designed it.
Right.
So it's really just more questions.
It's complex, because it's like that's why I struggle with the definition being exactly just advocating for Christian values in public policy.
Yeah.
I feel like I get how maybe the person who wrote that article, like, I get how that is part of it. Yeah. But I think it's missing what Garrett's talking about. It's missing that that what I've seen the dangerous form of Christian nationalism be is this notion that God's kingdom comes through America, and America's role is in part to as a not the people of America. The idea of America is to help God's kingdom come in fullest fruition. Right. And I think that is super complex, because, like we've said, it's a voluntary religion. But in addition to that, there's so many people who have different ideas of what it means to enact Christianity in America, where you get to the point where you have people storming the Capitol saying that this is the Christian vision and this is the Christian value that I'm fighting for.
Yeah.
because this is actually good for America.
Right.
And that's when it gets super muddy and super dangerous, because if we don't have good defined term or well-defined terms, if we don't like actually understand what God's plan is versus just thinking that America is supposed to be this value set where Christianity puts itself onto.
Right.
Because honestly, I think the places I've seen it most, and even I think I grew up with it a little bit, was Christianity was a form of identity attached to you being an American.
Yeah.
Like in the sense of like, I fight for these things that are Christian because it's a good American thing to do.
Right.
And in the meantime, I'm not talking to God at all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right,
In the meantime, I'm not actually interacting with my faith. My idea of what interacting with my faith is taking these things that society or culture has told me is Christian and saying, I need to fight for this thing in America so that the voice can be heard, so that people might understand who Jesus is. That's also the hard thing about this, is I don't know if a lot of Christian nationalists would even know that they are Christian nationalists.
Yeah, and or even that it's necessarily wrong.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a couple of things in there, Josh, that I thought was interesting. And another thing that Brian Zahn said in his article, which had a very inflammatory title, like it was like called
what was it?
I think it was like the heresy of Christian nationalism. Which I actually think that's probably about right. But but all that to say is he said that when you when you start thinking America is a new Israel rather than a new Babylon, that now.
Or Egypt.
Or Egypt. Yeah, like another empire. Now that gets wonky because the same people that would adhere to Christian nationalism would say if there is different administration in place, it's a new Babylon.
Right.
You know? Right. So it there is something to do with a particular political vision and set of values attached, and a party, particularly the Republican Party, attached to this idea of at least far-right Christian nationalism that was apparent on the 6th. So I think that is important to identify, is that because if you, there's so much as an idea for everyone to start thinking about and submitting about, is like, what happens if you start thinking about America like a new Israel? Right? Things like what you were just saying, Josh, can begin to happen, because like one of the things the Israelites were accused of in Jesus's time was not participating in the robust friendship and covenant relationship of what was said in Genesis, that Israel would be God's people and God, Yahweh, would be their God, like this unique friendship. And they took that, and instead of participating in it as a friendship, they leveraged the identity of their specialness above everyone else, right? Which all of a sudden then that begins to unfold, that there's this idea that America is the exceptional identity, the exceptional nation, the one that is special above all other nations. And it has its own mythology. It has its own iconography about how that is reinforced. You know, so just as a thought experiment, like run that idea through. Like if you begin to think like, oh, okay, like what did it when Israel walked out their identity?
Yeah.
Like the whole point of most of the Old Testament is that when you have that as an identity, it leads in your destruction.
Yeah.
Like it leads you down a path where you're going to be destroyed by another empire.
Well, that's what's fascinating to me about it, is obviously we can speak through the lens of Christian nationalism in America,
right?
Because obviously we're American. But what's fascinating to me is this isn't necessarily a new problem, and it also isn't. It's addressed all throughout the Bible. Yeah. Even if it's not addressed explicitly, like this is Christian nationalism, but the ideas that we see now are all throughout it. Like you're saying, Garrett, Israel wanted a king, and they wanted to be like the other nations, and they wanted to be like, look at us. And God said, all right, I'm going to give you what you want and give you into that. And it led to their own destruction because they weren't actually doing what the covenant told them to do, which was live in partnership with God and let that be enough.
Right.
And then when Jesus comes, what they want the Messiah to do is to overthrow Rome.
Yes.
Like to organize their nation so that they can overthrow the oppressor and make it more like
what it used to be.
Their vision of it.
Right. Like they wanted to make Israel great again. Like I'm not like no joke. They literally thought he was the new David.
Yes.
To come in and liberate them. Like that is not like a turn of a phrase to like upset the present, like the past administration's like catchphrase, but like that's literally what they thought was going to happen.
Yep. Yeah. And Jesus is not about that.
No, he's not about that action.
Not about that at all. He does a whole different kingdom. He's a part of a whole different movement. He's not even he doesn't even get near to engaging with that.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just really interesting to me because I think that it's something that has been ingrained in humans.
Right.
That we've seen all since the beginning of Scripture, specifically with faith. And it's usually to use our faith to elevate our picture of what we think things should be, rather than we are looking to go and worship God. Mm-hmm. It's more so we're going to use the elements of Christianity that we like to make society the way that we want it to be. Yeah, to gain power.
Right.
Which is, that's the danger of Christian nationalism in a large part.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things, though, that as we're talking, I can feel people asking is there a difference, though, between Christian nationalism and patriotism? Like,
right.
Like, is there such thing as a healthy patriotism? That's what I can just feel people wondering as we're talking about all of this.
And I really think that is a very healthy question to wrestle with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a really healthy question to wrestle with. And I don't have a good answer. Because like I think that I'm in a similar boat. Like I was strangely, like still in a way that I think I'm wrestling through presently. Like, holy crap, like America as a project might be done. Like we're literally watching it like unfold in front of us. Like, and honestly, if it wasn't for like a couple of like literally a handful of police officers that diverted people who were about to run in, like there literally could have been a hostage situation inside of the Capitol. I mean, like, it's not a far off reality. Like it's,
which is wild to be able to say that. Right. Yeah.
Like inches away.
Mm-hmm.
From that being a reality. So I think that I would have had a more concrete response before I watched democracy almost like fall away.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think the reason I ask too is because I think that there are a lot of people who are like exactly what you were saying at the top of the episode, Josh. Like, I don't agree with the violence. I don't agree with what happened, but XYZ, you know, like, but I love our country and I believe in, you know, some of the same values as some of the people that made the attack on the Capitol or whatever. And hear us talking about Christian nationalism and talking about it, that it is a really unhealthy mindset.
Ideology.
Yeah.
I think that's about the right way to say it.
But I wouldn't call myself a Christian nationalist, but is there an in between? Like,
yeah, and I would say that there was a book that came out that they reference. It's on my list now. It's called "Taking Back America for God," and now I need to read it. That essentially said the reason that most people, when they're watching that, at least in the evangelical tradition that we all inhabit, would say like, have some version of sympathy towards what's happening is because 78% of people have sympathy towards Christian national ideas to differing degrees. At least in the summary of the book that I read, it said like 50% are like advocators for it.
Wow.
Like, and there's some specific definitions of how they define Christian nationalism.
50%.
Yeah, 50%. And then if you move that into some combination of the factors that they consider Christian nationalists are just like either like sympathetic towards or like, I don't believe that, but I can see how you get there. Like totally like, yeah, like that's not my view, but like I'm okay with someone having that view. It moves up to 78%.
Yeah.
So the reason why you are there is most likely because this is an ideology that is in evangelical culture.
Yeah, right.
And we need to own that.
Right.
Yeah. And so the reason why you're struggling with how am I patriotic or how do I become thankful for the place that I was born, because it's not that, is because we just got exposed. A faulty and damaging set of ideology got exposed in us. And now we are like, oh my, like, like it kind of feels like the stutter, like, like let's say you like sinned against someone and maybe it was intentional or maybe it wasn't. And then they call you on it. Right. And they're like, hey, when you said that, like that hurt me. And then you like, there's like this kind of like rush of like adrenaline and like defensiveness, but also being like, I didn't want to hurt you. Like it's not my intention to hurt you, but I did hurt you. Like that set of emotions, like I want you to think in those terms. That's probably some version of what is going on in you as you're processing some of these events. So, and I don't want to like relieve that too quickly.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah, I think that's good, G, because I don't have an answer to the question either. I don't have it's something that I haven't thought a lot about, but it's something that I can't deny that I've been patriotic, like it's something, and I don't even know what to feel about that. Yeah. And how to process it necessarily yet. But I think that, I think more in the sense of, I think growing up, I was a lot more proud of the idea of America because I believed it to be pure. And I think that it's just been exposed to me. I have distrusted the idea more and more. But if patriotic is in the sense of I care about the people in America,
right,
then I lean towards that. But it's almost like, what is patriotism then? Like, is patriotism about the idea of America? Is it about caring for the people in America? Like wanting the state to work so that people's lives can benefit people. And so that's a hard tension, because I think that in one sense I'm like, yeah, I want the best policies, the best things to benefit the most people, because I want the state to function well.
Yeah.
But then there's also, I think there's another side to that is like, America is the city on the hill, and you hear it all the time in political talk, like in any aisle, like you hear it everywhere, that America is this nation that is supposed to be special and unique and different. And I even have to own that I've believed that for most of my life, like just in the sense, like even pay attention to how we cover crises around the world. We talk about Americans who were harmed, Americans who were killed, Americans who were this, American troops, American this. And like, I get why we report it that way, because it's like there are people connected to our country. Yeah. But it also, to me, illuminates a little bit of like, we're only really paying attention to our lives. Yes. Yeah. And that is something that I feel like I've understood more as I've grown up a little bit. But yeah, that whole idea is something I struggle with. G, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I'm kicking around an idea in my head. And so like I say this all like, and I'm going to start talking and I don't know what's going to come out.
No, this is our least authoritative podcast. We're really just...
Well, I know. And I think that I'm glad that we're doing it like this, because it's like I feel like this is something that we're wrestling with in real time, and so I feel like that I'm hoping that we can model something of how to have this dialogue. But here's one thing I want to say is to be patriotic actually means to speak honestly to the nation that you are thankful for. So the most helpful thing that we can do as Christians is to discipline our speech in a way that speaks truthfully to the events as we see them unfolding, to the degree that we can, understanding that they are all limited in speech. And so I wanted to leverage a different crises to try to illustrate what this means. This is actually from Stanley Hauerwas, who I quote regularly on this podcast. But after the 9/11 attacks happened, when you all were wee things.
Yeah. What were we, kindergarten?
I was.
First grade?
You weren't allowed, like you were young
6 or
enough
7?
to not be allowed to watch SpongeBob SquarePants, probably. Like you were
What
still,
a weird.
I've always been allowed to watch SpongeBob SquarePants.
What a weird gauge of age.
Well, I don't know. Like for me, it was Ren and Stimpy. My mom's like, never. You're too young for that.
Mine
I'm
was
like, Mom, I'm
Fairly Odd
17.
Parents.
I don't know why a 17-year-old voice sounded like that.
Did you say Fairly Odd Parents?
Yeah, Fairly Odd
That's
Parents.
what you weren't allowed to watch?
Yep. That and Ed, Edd and Eddy.
Wow.
Yep.
There was not a thing I wasn't allowed to watch.
Anyway, back to 9/11. How's that for a segue?
Yikes.
Howard says that, like after 9/11 happened, there was a lot of talk of war, right? We're going to war, which Hauerwas and myself believe in Christian nonviolence, and so that puts some cards on the table, you know. So, but he said, well, no, at least in the historic sense of war, nation states declare war. You can't go to war with a gang. Like say you can't go to war with the Crips. Like America isn't at war with them. You go to war with a nation. So what they did, like I believe the president, George W. Bush, was saying that was an act of war. And he's like, no, to say that honestly, that was an act of murder. And you don't go to war for murder. Even in the strictest just cause vision of Christian violence. Like that's just not something that happens. So the most important thing that we can do as Christians is to speak truthfully and honestly about what we see. But that takes a discipline of speech and an understanding of what it means to follow Jesus that I think much of the evangelical stream in America is missing. And I would even say progressive church streams are missing it for a different reason, but like a historically orthodox understanding of the Christian faith, we need to have that, understand it, and speak it honestly. So what does it mean to speak honestly into these moments? I think is a practice that we all need to learn how to say. So like, for example, like it wasn't a riot. It was an insurrection.
Right.
Yep.
You have to say that.
Right. Yep.
Right. But it's hard to say that because not everyone in the midst of that was part of the insurrection.
Yeah.
Right. But there were organized groups of people that were actively trying to take over the government that infiltrated the Capitol. Now, all of them weren't participating in the insurrection in the sense that it was intentional, but they were all complicit in an insurrection, right? So like those forms of disciplined speech, I feel like we need to be able to say, because then we're not painting people in broad brushes. We're saying like, no, you might not have intended to do that, but you were complicit in one. There was a smaller subset of you that was intentionally doing that, but yeah. So I think that that's an important thing too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that to sort of bring that down to earth a little bit for people listening, I think we ourselves can practice that by, like, even when we were just talking about patriotism and Josh was like, well, if by that you mean caring for the people in our country or whatever,
Right.
like, I would really challenge people, and this is something that I've begun to do over the last year or so, especially as the political landscape has gotten more and more dumpster fire. If you're about to say a word that feels like a buzzword or a cop-out word or a word that could be misinterpreted, instead taking the time to say what it is that you mean.
Yes.
Like, instead of saying, well, I'm patriotic. Like, I would not call myself a Christian nationalist, but I'm patriotic.
Right.
Like, if it could be like a Facebook thing, don't let it be.
Yeah.
Say instead what it is that you mean, because there is so much room for misinterpretation, and that's what gets us worked up to the point where we can't have a conversation.
Yes, that words, because of our polarized state, have different meanings to different subsets of communities. That's incredible, Ken.
Right. So I think that's something we can each challenge ourselves to do. That's really simple. That can make a big difference in our conversations and in our progress toward understanding what is happening and what someone else thinks about something.
Yeah, because I think that and this is what I think is just continuing to go in on that is to try to speak honestly about the events that happened.
Yes, right.
You know?
Right, yes.
So instead of the Revolutionary War was largely participated in by two groups: British Christians, American Christians, and native non-Christians who they were trying to actively convert to believe their system of belief. Right? So think about that. Christians were killing other Christians for the most part, as well as the ones that they were trying to evangelize on both sides in the name of God.
Right. That's the truth.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
And we celebrate that with 4th of July fireworks every year because our side won. Our Christians killed more of their Christians in a way that caused their Christians to retreat. Right? So it's interesting. Like, and once again, I am thankful for America. What I'm saying is but let's speak the truth about what happened. Because when we dress it up in the pageantry of it all, we become numb to the reality of what happened. Now, God has done incredible things and worked beauty from ashes like God always does. But that's what happened. The Civil War was Christians from the North killing Christians from the South in the North's own language in a holy war against slavery. Once again, I'm happy that slavery got abolished. But it was drenched in language of Christian nationalism. It was a new crusade, right? And that does not mean that the outcomes or the effects of that aren't, but that's what happened.
Right.
And only once we say what happened can we really wrestle with what's occurring, right? So same thing with the insurrection. Not everyone there was Christian. But there were enough people leveraging Christian imagery, Christian prayer, Christian symbols, Christian practices that it had, that was a religious insurrection.
Right.
And if we don't call it that, then we can't then also say that form of religion is heretical.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have to be able to name it as that.
Yeah. That's good, G. Well, and I think I want to add to that a little bit is if you feel the need to say, well, that I think part of what I've seen, and I've seen this in myself too many times, is when something happens with people that align with what you believe and they do something you wouldn't do, you don't feel the freedom to call it out for what it is, because there's a little bit of defensiveness.
Right.
Even though you don't need to defend yourself.
Right.
Even if you have things that you do agree with people that did something wrong, we got to be able to say that was wrong, full stop, and it doesn't say anything about you. And if you feel the need to be defensive about it, then I would say, what does that say?
Yes.
What is that actually revealing to you, and why are you feeling defensive about it? And I'm not just talking about insurrection. I'm talking about, we do that with a myriad of different things.
Yeah.
Where we as Christians see other Christians, and I do it too. And then I feel like we talked about earlier, I feel like I need to defend myself or defend what I think, because I don't want people to think that I'm a certain way, or I don't want people to think that God's a certain way.
Right.
And I think the invitation to us is be honest about what we saw, and that's sometimes the best witness you can give.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Because I think the desire is to clarify. Like there's like some defensiveness, but
Right.
I think the desire is like,
Yes.
oh, but don't get it wrong. Like there's, that's a different type of Christian or whatever. But by acting or speaking in defensiveness or blanketed terms, you actually can't clarify and you can't heal.
Right.
And it's only by being honest about what happened and what you're wrestling with and what you mean that there can actually be healing.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yes. And here's and I think that this goes into something that I really think is important for everyone to wrestle with. And it's that you and I and everyone listening to this all need to begin to understand what we think the role of the state is in the life of the Christian church and the kingdom of God. Like we need to think about that robustly, because right now we're not, and it's eating our freaking lunch.
Yeah.
We have to think about it, because otherwise something strange can happen. Because then you don't actually critique the ideology that led to that. It's a critique of methodology. Like you're like, oh no, like I actually believe the state is supposed to function the way that they think it does. I just don't I don't think they went about enacting what they hoped for the state in the right way. Right. I actually remember it similarly as a way of an analogy. When there was a street preacher that came up to the university here in our town. And I remember talking to a bunch of the people in our community that were at the university at the time. And one of the things that was so interesting was they were like, well, he's not wrong. His theology isn't wrong. The thing that is wrong is his methodology. Like I actually believe what he believes. I just believe his methodology is wrong. And I'm like, yo, that's wild. His theology is off, like totally off. And so this is what I want to encourage you. That wasn't like, now I will say this. If you think that it is simply methodology, I want you to dig into why you think it was just a methodological problem. I think that we need to understand how we think that the state works. And I just wanted to like really briefly help help you see just a little bit of how that has functioned in the life of the church. That actually I don't think that we should go back to this, but there was like a point in time in church history where the state and the church were intertwined. And I think that was a terrible idea. Massively terrible
Just for
idea.
the record.
Like, have you heard of the child crusades where they sent everyone under the age of 12 to like retake the Holy Land? That was a terrible idea.
Not great.
The Inquisition?
Not great.
Bad look.
Shouldn't have done that.
No. But the way that the state functions now, at least in the modern nation state, and this was all outlined by a guy named William T. Cavanaugh in this really incredible book. I'll put it in the show notes. But actually happened in the Reformation, where Catholic Christians were killing like Lutherans, what would become known as Lutherans, for their stances on the church, and then Lutherans were seeking refuge from German princes to protect them from their former church. So the nation state got introduced in order to settle disputes between rivaling religious Christian factions.
Mm-hmm.
So actually Luther freaking, I know,
Man, Luther.
Man, only Garrett giggles at such a
man.
thing.
Luther,
Martin Luther.
We told
not
you-
Luther Vandross.
not Luther.
Told y'all
Not
Garrett
Luther.
was a nerd about this.
Martin Luther came up with a concept he called it the two kingdoms theory, where he said that there are two kingdoms. There is the kingdom of heaven and there's the kingdom of earth. He based it loosely on Augustine, but it was a very based loosely on Augustine. But like there's the kingdom of heaven, and that's the realm of the church, the realm of the spiritual. So that is concerned with the immaterial, right? And then the state is concerned with issues of the body and what you can and cannot do with your bodies. And that's been essentially the fundamental like modus operandi of the church ever since. Like even up until MLK, like Martin Luther King said that the church is the conscience of the state. MLK was really under influence of this guy named Reinhold Niebuhr, who created this idea of called Christian realism, but and it had this whole political theory underneath it. But like that was the idea. There was these, like the church was responsible for the moral conscience, and then the state was supposed to be the one that enacted that conscience on behalf of God. And that is problematic predominantly because that level of dualism doesn't exist in the Christian imagination.
Mm-hmm.
But it's how we've effectively functioned. So in light of all of that, there's been essentially 3, and now I think you could probably argue that there's 4 streams of how people have thought about how the state and the church intertwine. And this is outlined by another great book, which I'd encourage you all to read if you want, but it is a little dense. And it's probably a little outdated. It came out in 2014, I believe, called To Change the World by James Davidson Hunter. And so I'll put that in the show notes as well. But he outlines 3 different positions, and then he proposes a 4th. I think it's a more nuanced version of the 3rd, but that's beside the point. But he calls it the Christian right, and that he would call that like the rise of like Jerry Falwell that started. He traces a whole history of it. It's really fascinating. So the Christian right, which I think is probably a very extreme version of what we just saw in the Capitol. The Christian left, which he would probably he characterizes as people like Jim Wallace and Sojourners, but essentially they're two sides of the same coin. Is his argument that they just disagree on policy, but they fundamentally believe similar things about the role of the state in the church's life. They just think that the particular policy issues are a little bit more robust and different. And then the 3rd option he says are the Neo-Anabaptists, which is a very fancy term, but my theological boyfriend Stanley Hauerwas is a Neo-Anabaptist. And then those are where he says that like essentially the way to say it. And like honestly, I just want to be really clear. Like this is the predominant political vision and theological position that I actively form everyone that I know.
Just to be clear.
Yeah, just to like be really honest. Like, I mean, I think
what you mean.
I think that mine is a little bit more nuanced than the kind of a caricatured version that he puts in the book. But that's totally fine. Like I can be caricatured. But that the church is an alternate body politic, meaning that the church is the embodiment of the kingdom of God. The church is a voluntary society that is under is the inbreaking point of the kingdom of God into this world, and that the church becomes a witness to the world about the reality that could be possible if they simply submitted to the lordship of Jesus in the way of Jesus. That is the neo-Anabaptist approach. And then he suggests something called faithfulness, faithful presence is his which I honestly think is actually more akin to the model of Anabaptism that I ascribe to, which allows for advocacy of Christian justice in the public sphere. The problem is that a Christian ethic is probably not all that useful to an empire.
Right.
Right. So like,
Yep.
so like when so like if you are running on a policy platform of forgiveness of enemies, like I just do not see how that gets you elected in a national election when you have to like protect your nation state against enemies, foreign and like domestic. You know,
listen to Jesus, turn the other cheek and give them more if they harm you.
Yes, like like trying to
turn out.
Person's not getting elected.
I just like if you take that in like for all intents and purposes, it's most literal saying. Right, without it's just going to be a hard platform to run on anywhere. Like if you're going to run on like an economic policy like that is outlined in the Jubilee year in the book of Deuteronomy, where all debts are forgiven every 7 years and 70 years, like
not a bad idea.
I mean, it's not. I mean, it's the biblical idea, but like that's like you're going to be called a redistributive socialist. You know. If you call for the level of like sexual purity that is required of a disciple, like you're going to be like you're going to be called a Puritan or worse, you know, like, so it's that's what that's the spot. And so I think that the thing that I would encourage you is to begin thinking about how you see the role of the state function in the life of the church. Like I said, those are the three broad positions that presently have laid out in a little bit of history and some books if you want to go listen to them.
Yeah, no, I think that's so helpful.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great way actually to wrap up the conversation. This is like one of those topics we could go on for hours about, but I think that's a helpful thing to leave people with.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, like it, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you can stay tuned for all of our content.